Welcome home, where we provide information, inspiration, and motivator after motivator after motivator here on America's Next. I'd like to have a conversation with you guys today about permanency. What is permanency to you, and where have you experienced permanency in your life? I'm going to take some time to get to know my followers, the folks who have been watching America's Next Motivator so far. And I'd like to have a conversation with you guys about permanency, what it is, and the lack of it that we have in our communities right now. We live in a difficult time, and there are many people who are having failed relationships all around the world, and it's a big problem. There's this concept of rehoming and adoption, where somebody might have been adopted by a particular family, and then they get kicked out of that home for whatever reason, right? But there are other areas in life or other examples of relationships where unconditional love is not the case and permanency is not the case. And that's a problem. The reason why it's a problem is because we've got to do better. I have a guest with me today who's going to talk to us about just that. We're going to talk today about permanency. We're going to talk about unconditional parenting, and we're going to talk about an actual pioneer of that concept. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you Pat O'Brien. How you doing, Pat?
Well, I'm doing just fine. Just let me apologize. I'm in COVID-19 mode. That's why I'm here a lot longer than it should be right now.
You ever had a chance to visit the barber?
They weren't open until this week, and then when I went, the line was very long, so I got an appointment on Friday.
Okay, all right. Well, the next time we have you on, then you have a fresh cut, right?
Yes, right.
All right. Hey, listen, I told our audience that we were going to be talking to a pioneer of unconditional love and parenting and functional adoptions. But before we get to that great piece of work, I want to talk about a little bit where you're from. Where are you from, Pat?
I am from Brooklyn, New York. From a little area called Marine Park is where I grew up, and then I moved to Coney Island about 15 years ago. So I have actually I'm living in a house in Coney Island.
Okay, all right. And where exactly did you grow up?
Well, it's a neighborhood that is I don't know if you ever heard of Kings Plaza. Outside of Kings Plaza, it's called Marine Park because there's a park in the middle of the neighborhood called Marine Park. And that's where I went to elementary school, junior high school, and high school.
Okay. We already have people in the building saying hello. You might recognize that name.
Hey, Yolanda Riley. Oh, hi, yeah. Yolanda.
Yeah. So elementary school was a breeze for you. How was middle school for you? Was it a breeze as well?
Well, middle school was more fun than any other school I've ever been in.
There you go.
I mean, at the time, we didn't spend a lot of time inside the school, but the school was actually in Marine Park.
Okay.
So played a lot of handball and played a lot of basketball, and somehow, some way, I always got promoted to the next grade, and then made my way into high school. And same thing there. I just kept getting through, and somehow I made it. And by the time I graduated high school, when I was a kid, a 4-year college had to accept you. And that's literally how I got into college. I graduated high school.
Oh, wow. You said a 4-year college had to accept you?
That's right. It was part of the city university structure that if you got a high school diploma, a 4-year college had. It's no longer like that anymore.
Right.
But back when I was a kid, I got accepted to John Jay College because somebody had to accept me. It's not because I had good grades. Just because somebody had to accept me. And I had this interest in law and criminal justice at the time.
Okay.
So I got in there.
Wow. Now, at what point did you start getting into child welfare?
Well, it was actually during college, I had some internships. And I worked for juvenile probation as an internship. And I worked for the Fund for Modern Courts as an internship. And I really learned, I thought I was interested more in juvenile justice, which I was at the time. And I figured with my bachelor's degree, I would just become a probation officer or something like that. And I just got lucky. I had a counselor that basically said, if you want to go into social services, it's not a bad career, but they don't treat you very well if you don't have like a master's degree. And I had no interest in getting a master's degree. I wanted to be discharged from my house that I lived for 22 years, because I took the train to school every day, took the train home every night. We couldn't afford to go away to college in my neighborhood. And I was ready to just get discharged, independent living. But anyway, but they said, it's just so what my counselors did in college, they had told me about a way to get a master's degree where you had to work for 2 years, because I had no real job experience. I worked for my father in a music store. And then when they explained to me that to get the master's, you had to actually work in the field you want to work in for 2 years, that sold me on the idea that, hey, maybe I'll go for a master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually was a very successful college student. I was one of the valedictorians the year I graduated. And I got accepted to Columbia University social work school. And then I had field placements there, and both my field placements were in child welfare. And that's how I really developed an interest in doing that. Because up until that time, the only experience I had with child welfare, and I didn't even know it, was my neighbor behind my house in the backyard. She had kids coming in and out, kids that became friends, and then they weren't there anymore. Right. And I never understood what was going on until years later. I found out that she was a foster parent.
Right.
And that's why kids I got to know were there, and then they weren't there anymore.
Right. How did you feel when you got into child welfare and you started to see the scope of what was going on? What was your initial reaction?
Well, my initial reaction was I got a job with a law firm called Legal Aid Society. So I saw child abuse, child neglect, PINS petitions, delinquency petitions. We worked with the lawyers on all sorts of family court cases. So I got a real good background in advocacy and really helping essentially poor people and their kids try to develop, a plan so they can stay together. But it was an awakening, and it was something that I was very fascinated by. And I basically worked with teenagers. Mm-hmm. And during that 4-year experience, after the 3rd year, my wife at the time and we adopted a child. So I became an adoptive parent. And then, because I had this great job in family court, but it didn't pay much. And now I'm a new dad, and I wanted to get a better paying job. And I looked in the New York Times. Back then, that's what you did. You looked for jobs in the New York Times. And I saw this job as an adoption supervisor. I said, oh, well, I'm an adoptive parent, so why don't I apply for that job? Mm-hmm. And I wound up getting that job. And it was a job that helped find homes for children who were in the foster care system. And that's my first experience with that. And then, I really found that job fascinating. I didn't really particularly like working for a foster care agency. So within 11 months, I looked for another job. Okay. And I got a job as a director finding homes for older kids in the foster care system in New York City with a private agency. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of how I worked my way. Hi, Annie Keene. And that's how I actually started on the career that I had developed for the next 25 years.
Now, what years about was this when you first got into the position of director and helping to find teens home? What year was it?
1987.
87?
Yes.
Okay. And what was the climate like? What did a difficult case look like at that time?
Well, the climate was drastic. We had over 50,000 kids in the New York City foster care system. Now, if you compare to what it is today it's about maybe 13, 14,000. Back then, 50,000. And there was a lot of kids coming into the system because of crack cocaine. Mm-hmm. But then, no matter when I worked in the system, the exit end, nobody paid attention to. The exit end where kids were being discharged, and literally they were. In 1987, being discharged at 18, 19, 20 or 21, 18 if you weren't doing well, 21 if you were doing super well, you got discharged to yourself. Nobody but yourself. and nobody focused on saying those kids need families as much as the young kids that are coming into the system. So I focused my career on the exit end of the system.
Right. And I think that was a heroic thing that you did, because what I want you to explain to our listening audience is what was happening to those adolescents who were aging out at the ages of 18 or even 21 if they were lucky. What was happening to them?
They were becoming homeless. Nobody was finding relationships for them back then. And they had no place to go. And back then, they were able to discharge kids to homelessness. Thank goodness things have progressed since then. Mm-hmm. And New York City no longer does that. And they have young people in their care now that some of them are 24, 25 years old. But back then, kids became homeless at a very young age.
Wow. And so you got into the system to discover that foster care was leading directly to homelessness.
Yes. In fact, that's what I learned at my first job as a director. And then I took that information and created an agency that we literally called the Homelessness Prevention Program. And the way that we were going to prevent homelessness was to get every kid a family before they aged out of care.
Wow. Okay. So you decided when you saw what was going on that there was a problem. The problem was that youth in foster care were being left to homelessness when they aged out. But then you didn't just absorb that problem. You actually created a solution for that problem.
That is correct. It was a privilege, and somehow back then in the mid-90s when we started the agency called You Gotta Believe, there was 40, 50 other agencies. The last thing the system needed was yet another agency.
Right.
I had convinced the licensing people and the powers that be that we're only going to do one job. And the one job that we're going to do is find families for the kids on the verge of aging out of foster care. And we actually got a license to do that work.
Now, I want to back it up a little bit because you created an organization called Homelessness Prevention.
Well, it was called You Gotta Believe, the Older Child Adoption and Permanency Movement. And then when somebody said, what do you got to believe in? You got to believe in children shouldn't be discharged to homelessness. They should have families before they leave our foster care system. So the idea what You Got to Believe was to get people to ask, what do you got to believe in? And then that was our response.
Right. What a flagship phrase to name an organization after. You got to believe.
Yeah.
That's very catchy. And it became a flagship and a key term for people to remember the concept of unconditional parenting and unconditional love.
Yep.
Yeah. What year was it when you started You Gotta Believe?
We started in 1995. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary this year.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And I was there, and they had a wonderful fundraiser. And I'm sort of an honorary member of You Gotta Believe. But after 18 years of doing the work, I said, it's time for somebody else to do it. And I actually went to continue doing the work, but as a line level person rather than as a director. Mm-hmm. So I had a lot of interesting experiences in my career.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of those today. How many teens would you say that you helped to find a family over the course of your years of work?
And that's exactly right, because I might have helped more than I actually physically placed. Because I can't tell you how many times I've heard people come up to me years after they heard me do a presentation, and they said it was because of my presentation that they chose to adopt older children. But I would say, maybe over 1,000, if not more.
Wow. That's absolutely huge. When you think about 1,000 young people who got a home that they would have never had, or 1,000 young adults nearly who got adopted when they wouldn't have otherwise been adopted, that's a lot of people.
It is a lot.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
You've changed a lot of lives. A lot of people's lives are changed because of the work that's been done by You Gotta Believe.
That's right. That is very true, and still being changed today.
Wow. So it's still growing.
Oh yeah. They're doing amazing.
How did you come up with the overall strategy? How did you initially come up with the strategy for You Gotta Believe?
Well, my first job as a director gave me the information that it needed to be done, and that is older kids, teenagers in foster care needed to be in families and not in group homes or child care facilities to age out. So that was a great experience, but I didn't particularly like working for the person or the people I was working for. And I said, okay, I got a group of parents together, a group of former foster youth together, and we created a board of directors, and we started our own agency, because this way we can do it the way that we want to do it, and allocate the resources, which is money, the way we wanted to allocate them. So so I went to take a year and a half hiatus to get the agency started. And then in 1995, we started placing older kids for adoption as our own organization.
You make it sound so easy.
Oh, it wasn't easy at all. And it was a lot of tedious work that I did as a volunteer for a good 6 years before I was able to make it a career again. So I worked a variety of child welfare jobs as I was getting You Gotta Believe going.
Right.
With the help of the board and some of the other parents.
Mm-hmm. What would you say was the biggest challenge that you had as you went to form You Gotta Believe?
In the beginning, no money. It's the challenge of everything. It was 6 years where we were working as volunteers,
Wow.
where we would do classes, and I would have myself and a couple other people help me out with them, and then we would license people because we got our license, and then when we licensed families, we actually searched for children that needed homes, and then when we would find the children and develop a contract with the entity that the children were living with, then they moved into our families. So and that's when at least my workers were able to get paid, is when the child moved into a family and we developed a contract. Mm-hmm. And then after the 6 years, the city of New York gave us a recruitment contract where we were able to do it full time ourselves.
Right. So apparently you guys, what you were doing was impressive for you guys to end up getting a contract with the city of New York.
Yeah, and that was what we had in my first job, and then the 6 year hiatus, and then what they call a request for a proposal became available, and we applied, and we got the funds, and we did that for many years after that.
And what would you say was different about what You Gotta Believe was doing versus what the other dozens of agencies were doing out there?
Focus. We just had one focus. We were only going to do one thing. Anything that we did would be getting a kid into a permanent home. When a kid moves into one of our homes, they don't move out. They remain a member of that family forever. And they either get legally adopted if they're freed for adoption and willing to be adopted, or they get morally adopted by the families that we place them with, which means that family has decided, I'm adopting you, and someday, maybe after you're a grown person, if you will allow me to adopt you, I'll legally adopt you. But right now, you are in my family for life.
Okay, so that's what a moral adoption is.
Yes.
Not necessarily you don't have to go to court and stuff like that.
Well, the only reason why you don't, even the years that I worked there, was one, the young person might have had an issue with being legally adopted. And there's a lot of good reasons why young people don't want to be legally adopted while the child is still a child, but they still needed a permanent family, even though they didn't want to be legally adopted. And then ultimately, and then sometimes after you turned 18, you really couldn't be legally adopted without losing a lot of benefits and services.
Okay.
So some of those kids waited until after they turned 21, and then they got legally adopted. One of the people watching this broadcast right now is somebody that fell into that category. Mm-hmm. But the idea of when we recruited the parents were making a lifetime unconditional commitment. They were indeed adopting this young person, and at some point, the young person will either allow themselves to be legally adopted, or at the very least allow themselves to remain a permanent part of the family. Mm-hmm. And for kids who were still under 18, I would say 50% of the kids that moved into our families did legally get adopted, but the other 50% got a permanent family because we utilized the foster care system to get kids a permanent home rather than just the next temporary home. Right.
And that's one of the things that made what you did such a pioneering endeavor, because this concept was not as alive as it was before you guys came along. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. If a child was deemed undesirable or nobody wants them for any reason, they would just be put in a group home setting or a residential treatment center setting.
Well, I mean, the guys was that those children needed therapy, they needed treatment. But the bottom line is, a lot of those young people needed a family more so than anything else, and that's indeed the fundamental treatment that they never had, and what they needed more than anything else.
Right.
So it turns out that most of the young people that we placed lived in what we've come to call congregate care facilities.
Right.
A group home, a resident treatment center, a hospital, and we would go to the kids and we would help identify families for them. And very often they would lead us to really good people that then we would reach out to them and bring them into a process, a learning process, and then a licensing process.
Mm-hmm. So if we have any young social workers out there who might be tuning in, because we are potentially broadcasting to thousands of screens across America right now, and this social worker wants to figure out how to deal with a difficult case. So I'm going to give you a scenario, and I want you to give me a hypothetical pursuit that you might make to get this child a family, okay? All right. So my name is Dwayne, and I am from Columbus, Ohio, and I've been in the foster care system for 8 years, and I'm just out here. Nobody wants me, and I landed in your lap as a new client. How would you go about getting me a family?
All right, variety of ways. One is I might do a little bit of what we call mobility mapping in your life. I would talk to you about where have you lived during your life history. Then I would focus on who cared about you. Who do you know loved you? Lead me to those people.
Mm-hmm.
That's one strategy that we would pursue while we pursue other strategies. For instance, if the person was comfortable meeting people, I would ask them to be our educators. I would ask them to teach a group of parents going through a process what it's like to be a young person in the foster care system.
Okay.
And it gives them an opportunity to share the same time and space with prospective families. So as I'm pursuing two avenues, there was always an opportunity for any kid, no matter what his age, where we could find somebody who truly cared about them or who truly wanted to care about them. Let's say if somebody met them in one of those same time and space learning opportunities where the young person was our teacher, and after I left, you got to believe, I was the director for 25 years wherever I was. I took a job, I went on a sabbatical. I went on a 2-year sabbatical.
Okay.
And some people, when they go on sabbaticals, they go to India, they go to Africa, they go to South America. I took my sabbatical in Connecticut. And what I did when I went to Connecticut is I asked the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption to let me be a Wendy's Wonderful Kids recruiter. And if you can find an organization, whether it's in Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, that will allow me to be a line worker, finding and recruiting homes for kids, having a whole caseload of just teenagers, I'll give them 2 years of my life. And turns out they found an organization in Connecticut where I could do that work. And I can tell you, I had about 15 kids on my caseload. There wasn't one kid on my caseload I couldn't find somebody who really, truly loved them. And then I became allies and friends with that person, for one, to see if they could make a permanent commitment to that young person, or if they can lead me to the person that can make a permanent commitment to that young person. Okay. So that, in a nutshell, is the strategy that I come to call follow the love strategy. You can't live to the ripe old age of 14, 15, 16, 17 and not be alive without connections. And what we want to do is pursue those connections and develop relationships with those connections and try to bring those connections into a learning process where they can learn about the difficulties that young children, teenagers might have because of their early life traumas.
Right.
Early life losses. And even though you feel you know the person well, we want you to understand them well as well. So we created the learning environment that You Got to Believe.
Okay.
You Got to Believe's whole approach to the world, and I still think it's the same way today, is learn about adopting teenagers.
Learn about it.
Yep. And anybody that we might also find that knows a teenager, we ask them to learn about it as well.
Mm-hmm. So raising awareness is a fundamental key to the culture. Raising awareness.
That is correct. Because as we're raising awareness, we're teaching them how to parent somebody they already love or somebody they're going to love.
Right.
And to help them understand why there might be some behaviors that you don't appreciate, and help them understand the behaviors as a language in the context of early childhood loss and early childhood trauma.
So in essence, you decided to create a culture which was an ongoing discussion about teenagers, learning them, understanding them, and raising them. So essentially, you created a learning center.
Well, yeah, it was definitely our focus to the world is come in and learn. You're absolutely right.
And then also it helps everybody, not just youth in foster care or not just people who are in child welfare, but there's something in it for everybody.
That's true. That's very true.
We all need to learn how to raise children.
Yeah. And whether you go on to adopt a teen or not, you learned a lot of good information during the time you spent with us. It was about 10 weeks.
Right. Wow. Can you talk to me about what is, because you mentioned this idea of unconditional love and support. What is that? Can you talk to us about that? What is that?
Well, love is sometimes it's a feeling word.
Okay.
Sometimes it's an action word.
Okay.
And unconditional commitment is love in action. Unconditional commitment is the only type of commitment that parents offer to their children that matter. If you are a parent and you willy-nilly and you're not there for your kids, you might love them, but you don't have the unconditional commitment. What people have had to learn was the form of love that every child needs is at least one parent who's unconditionally committed to them for a lifetime. And the lifetime we're talking about is obviously the parent's lifetime, but also its memories after the parents have gone.
So does unconditional parenting, does that mean not giving up or not ever giving up?
Yes. That is saying that if your child needs treatment, you're going to the hospital. If your child does something that they shouldn't have, you'll visit in jail. If your child has mental health issues, you visit in the hospital. But one way or the other, you are the person who's orchestrating because you do not give up. You are unconditionally committed. Because sometimes children need treatment outside the home, but they don't need to be abandoned because they need treatment outside the home. And our families learn that whatever is going on, you're committed for life.
Right. That's a great segment to go into our break. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're talking to Pat O'Brien, who is a very, very well-versed man when it comes to getting teens adopted and sustainable relationships all throughout the child welfare sector. I think we can all learn something from him today, and we're going to be right back after this brief message. America's Next Motivator. Tune in Monday, Wednesday, Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 a.m. Eastern. America's Next Motivator, hosted by Cedric Riley, sponsored by our good friends at 4D Healthware. And we're back. How you feeling, Pat?
I got me some water, so I'm feeling good.
As you were talking about the concept of unconditional love and parenting and what it was, I couldn't help but to remember that there are some parents out there who might be having a tough time out there, and they need to be reminded about the concept of unconditional parenting.
Yeah.
So I think that was a strong point. You know, a lot of young parents out there, they have troubles. They might want to give up. A lot of foster parents out there, they might have challenges and they might want to give up. And recently, I've heard about adoptive parents doing something what's called rehoming. Have you heard of that?
Yeah. I mean, the media plays it up big time. I mean, I don't think it happens a lot, but it gets attention when it does happen.
See, to me, there might be a more specific definition for it, but to me, it sounds like giving up. It sounds like not unconditional parenting.
Right.
If you're gonna rehome, can you tell our viewers what is rehoming?
Well, no, I don't really know what it is, except a parent giving up rather than getting their child the treatment that their child needs. There's sort of an expectation that this shouldn't be happening to me, so I'm going to place this child with some other family. And there's no agencies, there's no supervision, there's no guidance involved. But rather than accepting that sometimes whether you have birth children or children that you have adopted, they might need treatment for certain things, but the treatment that they do not need is to be abandoned by their parents, whether they're newly adoptive parents or any parent at all. So rehoming is simply a form of abandonment. You're re-traumatizing, you're re-victimizing, you're re-hurting, you're re-everything that particular child.
Right.
The idea of rehoming is insignificant to the extent that accept that you are correct. It is a form of abandonment.
Right. Yeah, because that's what I hear of it, and so I want to double down because of the emergence of that on the importance of unconditional commitment and sustained adoptions. What are some tools that parents can use or approaches that parents can take to make sure that their adoption or their kinship relationship works for a lifetime?
Well, now that a lot of trainings are becoming virtual, there might be really good experiences people can learn about. I didn't tell you what my current role in life is. Do you mind if I share that with you for a second?
Please do.
I'm the executive director of the Adoptive and Foster Family Coalition of New York.
Okay.
And we were a very local agency where we brought really trauma-informed parenting to families after their kids moved in, after their children were adopted. And we were doing these 6-week trainings with families who had their kids already and who were struggling. And there was so much good information out there right now about parenting the traumatized young person, and how their first three years of life, their brains didn't get a chance to develop in the way that the people who are raised by their birth parents who are raising them correctly and meeting their every need for the first 3 years of life, where their brains are allowed to develop and not have to be on survival mode all the time. Right. So a lot of good information out there. Like right now, we're doing a series, which we never would have done if it wasn't for COVID-19. Mm-hmm. We're doing a series that we meant to be for our families who we're serving in our post-adoption programs. But the reality is anybody who's got kids can take this series.
Right.
And we're bringing great information to people about how to reframe the way you parent. Because basically, if we were raised, and I know this is not true for you, but a lot of us who work in this field, if we were raised by our birth families, or a lot of our foster and adoptive families, if we were raised by birth families, we never learned how to raise a child of trauma and a child of loss. And we have to reframe parenting to help people understand that they might be triggering their own children because they are parenting their own children the way their parents parented them. Now, how do a lot of parents parent their children? My mother was quick with her hands.
Okay.
The yeller. She was a screamer. She wasn't very much about talking and calming things down. Well, I tolerated that because she was there for me when I was a baby. She took care of my every need. I was able to grow up not feeling I had to be in survival mode all the time. But if that same mom or me raising a child and I didn't understand trauma, I could start yelling and screaming, and that would just totally trigger the child. I mean, I swore off hitting kids, so I never wanted to ever do that. I knew that was always wrong. But even something as simple as sending somebody to their room. I mean, my mother could have done that to me, but that's a trigger of abandonment. Why are you separating me from the family if I did something wrong? Why don't you bring me in closer? So these are things that we have to reparent, teach people about how we got to raise kids who've been traumatized.
Wow.
And that doesn't mean we don't deny privileges and ground and do all of that, but there's a lot of work to be done. Our parents, we did the misbehavior, they did the correction. The old 1-2 punch. That's the way most of us grew up.
Mm-hmm.
When you're raising a traumatized child, there's things you got to do first. Like you see the behavior. Now you got to calm yourself down because only you got to be calm. Then you got to regulate your kids' emotions first. Before you do any correcting, you got to calm yourself down. Your child's got to calm down. Then you got to be genuinely curious about why that behavior happened. Because you want to get to know your child's mind. And you want your child to know that you want to know their mind. What led to that behavior. And then you got to have an acceptance, not of the behavior, but of the thoughts and the feelings that led to the behavior. And that's 5 steps right there. Now, step 6 is going to be some sort of correction.
Right.
And then step 7, which I know my parent never did, is a repair. Okay. You genuinely said your correction is you're not going out this weekend. But you don't have to feel good about it as a parent. You can say, oh, Johnny, I'm sorry, you cannot go to that party this weekend. Now, they're going to be upset at you. And then on Monday morning when the weekend is over, you do a repair. You're genuinely empathetic that they missed the party. But it was the consequence after. So this is a synopsis of what we're teaching parents about reframing their parenting from the way they were parented as children.
Right. Okay. We're going to take a comment from the audience.
Oh, good.
Yolanda says, did your agency partner with other programs or organizations to help them build resources? It takes a village.
Certainly, you got to believe his partners with all sorts of agencies around the New York City area. Our coalition, AFFCNY.org, partners with every organization. And I agree that it takes a village to raise a child, only if you understand the child must have a parent in that village. A village outside of a parent cannot raise a child. Give you an example. I grew up on a village. My village was a block in Brooklyn. If I am in the middle of the street and I'm yelling and screaming and saying curse words when I was 11 years old, one of the neighbors would come up to me and say, you better stop doing that or else I'm going down to tell your mom. I stopped doing it because I don't want my mom to know. And if my mom knew, that wouldn't be a good thing for me. That's the village raising the child. But if I didn't have the mom in the village, it wouldn't have mattered.
Right.
After I care.
Right.
Can't even, So the thing is, yes, it does take a village, but you got to be a member of the village through your family.
Wow.
Forget that.
Wow. Now, when you look at the current circumstance of child welfare, I understand that a lot of people in care, they're not able to make contact visits right now.
Yeah.
And there's some loss happening in terms of time. What do you think would be one of the best things that we can do moving forward to ease the situation of what's going on right now during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, I mean, the thing is to never forget that when a child comes into foster care, our goal is to help them, to help their family get the services and the help that they need so they could indeed go back to the village and be raised by their original families. And of course, during COVID, especially in the very beginning, kids were missing their visits. Then they were doing it on Zoom and on video, and it's just not the same. But we never forget how our major goal is to help children return home, help the foster parents co-parent the children and get to know their birth parents well. And we have to transition our entire system to get everybody on the side of the original families of our children. And only when that doesn't work out do we create alternative plans. And I got involved in this field where it already didn't work out. So the young people who are now getting close to adulthood needed a family again. But the best thing for right now is to really help repair the original family and get them to a stage where they can parent their children again. And hopefully with the continued support of the people that they identify as people that can help them.
Right. And so if there are any of our viewers out there who might be living inside of a dysfunctional family right now, what would you say could be two things that family could do to be a little bit more functional?
That's interesting because almost everybody, and during the time that they are dysfunctional, will argue emphatically that there's nothing dysfunctional going on. So if there's a strong denial involved in the dysfunctionality, it's a very difficult thing to do, and that I do believe is why some kids wind up in care. Now, not as many kids as when I first started in this field. I mean, that's a major accomplishment in this field, that we went down from 50,000 kids to about 12 or 13,000 kids. But the thing is, it's okay to even sometimes ask for help. If you know a child's being abused, it's okay to call a helpline or a hotline. But the system should never forget. Our goal is to give the family that, quote, was dysfunctional the skills that they need so that children can return home. And there are wonderful programs. And now, I come from New York City, and I'm in New York City. There are wonderful programs, like a program called RISE, where they help original families get their lives back together. They help them attend meetings. They help them become writers of their own stories. I tell you, one of the most inspiring things that I've attended during COVID is a virtual graduation of one of the RISE programs, where moms, and unfortunately, they were all moms, but where moms got their lives together, they graduated the program, and they were so proud. And I think every one of them had their children return home to them. That's something where we might have to seek help, but don't turn help into a hindrance. Make sure we stay on the track of helping our original families get their children back.
Do you think that somewhere in the past 15 or 20 years that child welfare at large forgot about that piece of repairing the original family, and did that play a role into how many kids we had in care over the years?
It could have been. I mean, there's so many theories about why things turn out the way they do. I know the goal of the system, as long as I've been involved in the system, now it's well over 30-something years, it's always been the goal to return kids home and to help repair the family.
Okay.
Whatever area. But somehow, for the older kids, they always got, or the kids who turned into older kids, they had always gotten forgotten. And that's why I always stayed focused on just that population.
Right.
There will always be people at that end of the system that need extra help and extra intervention. And that's why I'm delighted that the organization I found, it still exists and still does that.
Right. As you know, Pat O'Brien, I was adopted as a teenager. I was 15 and a half years old when I got adopted. And I know that for a lot of teenagers in the foster care system, they don't think that adoption is a reality. They don't think it's an option.
That's true.
And they don't think that it's going to be a positive thing in their life.
That's right.
Have you ever had a teenager come to you and say, you know what, Pat, I was adopted and it was a very positive thing in my life? Has that ever happened to you?
I mean, that happens occasionally, But what mostly happens is I don't want to deal with another family again. I've been so burned by families. Forget about it. I don't want to. I don't want. That's the commonality. I mean, that was my caseload with Wendy's Wonderful Kids, and now a lot of the kids that we served at You Gotta Believe. But that doesn't stop us from recruiting families for kids. That doesn't stop us from asking the young person. Then you tell me who you want to go with. As long as it's a person and a family, will help develop the relationship. But yes, I mean, sometimes people have very good experiences, but. Right. The work is helping young people understand over time that we work with them that relationships are a good thing, even though you've been burned and hurt by them time and time and time again. We're asking you to give it one more shot. And then if that doesn't work out, we're asking you to give it one more shot. If that doesn't work out, we're asking you to give it one more shot.
Right.
Because the alternative just is not it's just not an alternative.
Yeah, it's not an alternative. There is no other alternative to a strong, continuous relationship. It's what we all need.
Yep. Yeah, and you talk about the world's next motivator. Okay, I'm a has-been motivator. I used to do motivation. And part of my motivation when I was on the road talking about this work, I have to say, I always told your story because your story was one of the most inspirational stories that I've ever heard. You know how you got your original family, and I can tell it now, but I just want you to know your story was an inspiring story, and people really love to hear it.
I appreciate that, and for all of the young rock stars in the child welfare industry today, young social workers, young caseworkers, young innovators, I want you to know that today we're talking to a living legend. This gentleman right here. He went viral in the 80s. He went viral all through the 90s before viral was a thing.
Oh, yeah.
Because his idea of never giving up, being unconditional, digging back down, refiguring, retooling, redoing. Maybe sometimes you've got to unmarry what you thought was a great idea in order for a successful outcome. That essence of getting through for a change for young people in care is what led to this man's phone ringing off the hook for over a decade. And so I want us all to be reminded of the importance of making sure that young people get what they need in order to become stable adults and then placing them safely in the likes of adulthood. Pat, do you recommend any books for our parents or our teens out there?
You know, I can tell you're asking me a question, but you're sort of frozen.
Okay.
So can you try asking it again?
Yeah, books.
I can hear.
Would you recommend any books to our families out there?
Gosh, I wish I would have thought. Yes, there are great books out there. One of my favorite books is Beyond Consequences, Logic and Control by Brian Post and Heather Forbes. I love the any book written by Brenda McRae. She did a book, Adopting the Older Child. Karen Purvis, The Connected Child. That's an excellent book as well. And a book that we base our reframing parenting class on. I wish I remembered the name of the book, but the author of the book was Kim Golding. And any book that Dan Hughes writes. So there's a lot of great information out there. It's a variety of different people saying the same thing in a different way. But the message is we have to calm ourselves down in order to calm our children down, in order to be curious about why they're reacting the way they are, to be accepting of the thoughts and the feelings, because we can't accept the behaviors. And that philosophy. And for anybody who might be watching this podcast, we're actually doing a 9-week series with Brenda McRae. We'll start it last Tuesday, but tomorrow night. And there's great information out there. And anybody can write to me if they want more. Can I give my email?
Sure. What's your email address?
It's pat@affcny.org. The Adoptive and Foster Family Coalition of New York, AFFCNY.org.
Okay. So people can contact you if they have questions or if
Yeah.
they just want to learn more about how to do what they do.
Yes.
Okay. As we round third base, so to speak, here, Pat, I want to talk a little bit about how do we keep child welfare out on the front with all the other important issues that we face in society. I see that during different times, different issues come up and they become really big issues. But I always see foster care and the child welfare industry as a key issue that should just be pinned to the agenda of Congress at all times. It should be pinned to the vision boards of all of our innovators. I mean, we've got to constantly include child welfare. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I guess that's a statement I can agree with. I can agree that it should be on the front burner. It's sort of ironic that child welfare got on the front burner a couple of years ago, and it continued since then, when we were simply viciously separating children from their parents at the border. I think that was the time where people started really realizing, oh my gosh, what are we doing? What type of cruelty are we doing to children when we force them to be separate from their parents? And I was hoping back then that really would awaken people to that fact that we have child welfare in this country where you can come forward and be helpful. It would be nice if people would sign up for a learning experience so that they can learn how to help families have their children return home, so that they can become mentors and buddies and friends to the children's birth moms and birth parents and birth families. So that's what I hope for in terms of keeping it on the front burner, is that people will come forward and become parents, foster parents, adoptive parents if that's needed, but I'm really focusing on foster parents right now. But foster parents who come with the intention of doing parenting right, and that is to help become partners with the children's parents and become almost mentors and almost bringing them into your extended family so that child can return home. And that's why it needs to be on the front burner, so we can recruit more people to do that.
Right. Wow, without a doubt. Like I said, you've given us a wealth of information today. Landis says, wonderful work that you're doing, Pat. Thanks.
Landis?
So it looks like you've really impressed our audience today. You've given us a lot of really good information. And I just want a little bit more of your time. I want to pick your brain and get as much as I can. Right. What's your philosophy on life? What's your philosophy on life?
That's that's such a big question.
Yeah.
I have this little I have this little rock in my house, and now of course I'm drawing a blank on it because it is my philosophy of life. Oh yes, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right.
Okay. Wow.
And basically, what that means is you have to know you can do something, and you're going to be right. But you also, if you think you can't do something, you're going to be right about that as well.
Right.
What I want you to do is to choose the positive over the negative. Mm-hmm. And that was my whole philosophy of recruiting families for kids. If you think you can, you can. If you think you can't, you can't. One thing for sure is you will always be right. But if you think you can't find families for kids, it's not even worth going looking, because if you're looking for something you know is not there, it doesn't make any sense. So you have to know the families are there. Mm-hmm. And once you do that, you will do that. So that's probably a general worldview on life.
I think that's great. I just have a few more questions for you. Now, the reason why I created this platform was to be a source of positive and helpful media for children and families going forward. In other words, there might be young people who could be watching this episode in the future, and I want everybody who comes on this platform to give them some information that they can definitely use along the way. So I have 3 questions for you that I want you to ask. Number 1, what is survival to you?
Well, actually, it's my T-shirt. Family is the most important thing because you can survive.
There you go.
That's really what it is, because survival mode. It's very interesting.